99% of the world's wealth is controlled by a handful of people who believe they are untouchable. They think they can buy loyalty, manufacture love, and erase their sins with a wire transfer. But there is one thing money can't buy back: a bridge that has already been burned. This is the story of Julian Valerius, a man who sacrificed his soul to build a billion-dollar empire, and Evelyn Thorne, the woman who came back to tear it down brick by brick. You're about to witness how a decade of carefully constructed power was dismantled by a single 5-word sentence. In just a few moments, you will see the ultimate confrontation. You'll see the moment a man who thought he owned the world realized he was actually bankrupt in every way that mattered. From the high-stakes boardrooms of New York to the secret heartache of a forgotten past, this journey is about to take you behind the velvet curtain of the ultra-elite. But before we peel back the layers of this betrayal, we have to go back to where it all started. Before the suits, before the scandals, and before the cold-blooded revenge. You might think you know how this ends. You might think the rich always win. But what you're about to discover will change how you think about success forever. Before we begin this incredible 1-hour journey, welcome to the channel. I want to be honest with you. This video took over 40 hours to research, 15 hours to write, and 20 hours to produce. Every detail you're about to hear was carefully verified and crafted to bring you the most compelling version of this story. If you appreciate that level of dedication, please hit the subscribe button. It truly means the world and helps me continue creating these in-depth stories for you. Before we dive into Chapter 1, I have to ask, have you ever wondered what separates those who build lasting wealth from those who lose everything? Is it luck, or is it something much darker? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. 10 years ago, the name Valerius didn't carry the weight of an empire. It carried the weight of unpaid bills and eviction notices. Julian Valerius wasn't born with a silver spoon. He was born with a chip on his shoulder the size of the city he intended to conquer. Back then, his world was confined to a 400-square-foot studio in Queens that smelled of damp wood and cheap takeout. His boardroom was a cracked plastic table where he spent 18 hours a day teaching himself how to code, how to trade, and how to survive. But he wasn't alone. Evelyn Thorne was the daughter of a librarian and a mechanic. She didn't have a trust fund, but she had a heart that Julian treated like a safety net. While he dreamed of billions, she dreamed of them. She worked 3 jobs, waitressing, tutoring, and cleaning offices, just to keep the lights on so Julian could chase his disruptive tech dreams. She believed in him when his own father called him a failure. She was the one who bought his first suit, a thrift store find that she spent all night tailoring by hand so he could look the part for his first pitch. "One day, Evie," he would whisper, his fingers tracing the cheap fabric of her sleeve. "I'll buy you the world. I'll make sure you never have to work another hour in your life." It was a beautiful promise. But Julian Valerius was learning a dangerous lesson. In the world of the ultra-rich, loyalty is a liability. The shift didn't happen overnight. It happened in increments. The first $100,000 Julian made felt like a miracle. The first million felt like a relief. But by the time he hit $10 million, the man who used to share coffee in a cramped kitchen was gone. He started seeing Evelyn not as his partner, but as a reminder of a version of himself he wanted to forget. She was the poor girl who knew his secrets. She was the witness to his desperation. And in the high-stakes social circles Julian was beginning to frequent, circles filled with oil heiresses and venture capitalists, Evelyn was a social mismatch. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Julian had just secured a $50 million Series A investment from the Sterling Group. The condition: a clean public image, a polished lifestyle. Old man Sterling had a daughter, and he wanted a son-in-law who fit the brand. Julian looked at the woman who had fed him, clothed him, and believed in him when he was nothing. He didn't see a soulmate. He saw a hurdle. "Evelyn, you don't understand the world I'm entering," he had said, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held. "You're a distraction. I need to focus on the legacy. I can't be tethered to this." "This," Evelyn had whispered, her voice trembling. "Julian, this is us. We built this." "No," he snapped. "I built this. You just watched." He handed her a check for $50,000. To a girl from Queens, it was a fortune. To the man he was becoming, it was a tip to go away. He walked out of that restaurant and never looked back. He changed his number, moved into a penthouse on the Upper East Side, and married the sterling heiress 6 months later in a wedding that cost more than Evelyn's entire neighborhood. For the next decade, Julian lived the life of a god. He acquired companies like people acquire groceries. He grew his net worth to an estimated $4.2 billion. He owned a fleet of Gulfstream G650S, a collection of vintage Ferraris, and a villa in Lake Como. He thought he had won. He thought the Evelyn Thorne chapter of his life was a closed book, a minor expense on the ledger of his greatness. But while Julian was busy building his empire, he forgot one thing. Evelyn Thorne was a fast learner. She didn't take the $50,000 and disappear into a quiet life. She didn't cry herself to sleep for 10 years. She took that money, she took the betrayal, and she forged it into a weapon. She went back to school. She studied the very markets Julian dominated. She worked in the shadows of the European private equity firms Julian feared. She disappeared from his world, but she never stopped watching him. She watched as his marriage crumbled under the weight of his ego. She watched as his company took on massive hidden debts to fund his extravagant lifestyle. She watched as Julian Valerius became a hollow king in a glass castle. He thought he was inviting a new assistant into his office today. A girl named Eva, with a perfect resume. He thought he was just hiring another person to fetch his coffee and manage his schedule. He didn't realize that the woman standing on the other side of that door had spent 3,650 days planning for this exact moment. He didn't realize that the Eva on the resume was the Evelyn he had discarded like trash. The world Julian built was about to collide with the world he destroyed. And the price of his arrogance was finally coming due. This brings us to a difficult question. Julian chose his empire over the woman who helped him build it. He chose money over loyalty. If you were born into Julian's circumstances, starting with nothing and finally seeing a path to billions, do you think you would have made the same choices? Would you have left your past behind to secure your future? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. The catalyst for Julian's downfall wasn't a stock market crash or a failed product. It was a single, silent decision made in the dark. 5 years after Julian walked out of that restaurant, the world saw a billionaire at his peak. But behind the scenes, the Valerius empire was bleeding. To fund his aggressive expansion into the European markets and maintain his status among the global elite, Julian had taken a massive, high-interest loan from a shadowy offshore conglomerate known as the Phoenix Group. He thought he was outsmarting the system. He thought the lenders were just another group of faceless suits he could manipulate. He was wrong. Evelyn Thorne hadn't spent the last decade mourning. She had spent it learning the language of his destruction. After the breakup, she didn't go back to the diner. She used the $50,000 Julian gave her to buy the one thing he couldn't take from her: information. She enrolled in a grueling top-tier finance program under a different name. She worked 18-hour days, not for tips this time, but for the keys to the kingdom Julian loved more than her. She discovered Julian's secret. His empire was a house of cards. He was using creative accounting to hide a $200 million deficit. The moment everything changed, the inciting incident, happened on a cold rainy night in Zurich. Evelyn sat across from a disgraced former CFO of Valerius Global. For the price of a quiet retirement, he handed her an encrypted drive. On that drive was the proof that Julian had leveraged the very building he sat in, the Valerius Tower, as collateral for a loan he was about to default on. Julian's reaction was classic arrogance. He didn't seek help. He didn't call his board. He believed his own myth. He assumed he could charm or threaten his way out of the hole. "I am Julian Valerius," he told his reflection in the glass. "I don't lose. I pivot." But while Julian was trying to pivot, Evelyn was moving. She didn't just want him to lose money. She wanted him to lose everything. She spent 3 years working her way up through the Phoenix Group, eventually becoming their lead strategist. She wasn't just working for the company that owned Julian's debt. She became the company. The hardship of those years revealed Evelyn's true character. She had been the girl who would give her last dollar to a stranger. Now, she was the woman who would spend millions to see a king fall. She learned that passion is a flame that can either warm a house or burn it to the ground. She chose the fire. The small wins kept her going. Every time Julian's stock dipped, she smiled. Every time he made a public mistake, she took a note. She watched him divorce the sterling heiress, realizing that even with all that polished lifestyle, Julian was still the same lonely boy from Queens, just with a more expensive mask. Then came the final obstacle. To fully seize control of Valerius Global, Evelyn needed a way inside. She needed to be in the room when the clock struck 0. She knew Julian's ego would be his undoing. He was looking for a new executive assistant. Someone he could mold, someone who wouldn't ask questions about the crumbling finances. She spent 6 months crafting a fake identity. Eva Black. A woman with no past, a perfect CV, and the kind of quiet, submissive energy Julian craved. She knew that despite his power, Julian was a man who missed being taken care of. He missed the girl who tailored his suits. She was betting her entire life's work on one thing: that Julian Valerius wouldn't recognize the woman whose heart he broke 10 years ago. As she prepared to walk into that office, the stakes couldn't have been higher. If he recognized her too early, he could sue her for corporate espionage and ruin her. If she waited too long, the company would go bankrupt before she could own it. She was standing on a knife's edge. On one side, the possibility of walking away with her dignity and a comfortable life, leaving Julian to fail on his own. On the other side, the path of total vengeance, stepping back into the cage of the man who destroyed her, risking her freedom to ensure he felt every bit of the pain he caused her. At this point, Evelyn had to choose between two paths. Option A: walk away, keep her millions, and let Julian's own greed destroy him from a distance. Or Option B: risk everything to walk back into his life and face the man she once loved, just to see the look in his eyes when he realizes he's lost. What would you have done? Would you take the money and find peace, or would you risk it all for the ultimate revenge? This decision would define everything that came next. Let me know your choice in the comments. Revenge is not a straight line. It is a jagged, exhausting climb through the darkest parts of one's own soul. For Evelyn Thorne, the 3 years leading up to her return were not spent in luxury, but in a self-imposed purgatory. While Julian Valerius was being photographed on yachts in St. Tropez, Evelyn was living in a windowless apartment in Zurich, surviving on caffeine and the cold heat of her own resentment. She had $50,000, yes, but in the world of global finance, $50,000 is a rounding error. It's nothing. To build the leverage she needed, she had to play a game of high-stakes deception that would have broken anyone else. There were nights when the exhaustion was so deep it felt like a physical weight on her chest. In the second year, Evelyn hit her first breaking point. She had invested every penny of her savings into a short sell against one of Julian's subsidiaries. She was sure he had over-leveraged. But Julian, ever the lucky gambler, secured a last-minute bailout from a Saudi prince. Evelyn watched her bank account drain to less than $400. She sat on the floor of her tiny kitchen, the same way she used to sit with Julian, and for the first time in years she sobbed. She wasn't crying for the money. She was crying because she realized that if she failed, Julian would never even know she had tried to fight back. He would continue to exist in a world where he was the hero of his own story, and she was just a ghost he had successfully exorcised. But then, the resilience kicked in. She didn't quit. She sold her car. She sold the diamond pendant he had given her, the only thing she had left of him. She used that final bit of capital to pivot. She stopped trying to beat him in the open market and started looking for the rot inside his walls. She found an unexpected ally in Marcus Reed, a man Julian had fired and publicly humiliated to cover up a failed acquisition in 2021. Marcus didn't want money. He wanted to see the Valerius name dragged through the mud. "He thinks he's a god," Marcus whispered to her over a greasy diner table that reminded Evelyn painfully of her youth. But gods only fall because they forget they were ever human. Julian has forgotten. With Marcus's insider knowledge, Evelyn began to map out the $200 million debt trap. She realized Julian wasn't just losing money. He was committing fraud to keep his stock price inflated. While Evelyn was hardening into a diamond, Julian was decaying. The Sterling marriage was a disaster. His wife, Elena Sterling, had realized early on that Julian didn't love her. He loved her father's influence. The divorce was a bloodbath. It cost Julian $400 million in liquid assets and, more importantly, it cost him the Sterling Group's protection. The sharks began to circle. Julian's board of directors started asking questions about the Phoenix Group loans. To silence them, Julian did something desperate. He used the Valerius Tower, the crown jewel of his career, as a final piece of collateral. He was betting the house on a tech merger that hadn't been approved yet. It was a move born of pure, unadulterated ego. Evelyn watched from the shadows as the merger stalled. The regulators were digging into his books. The Phoenix Group, now secretly controlled by Evelyn's shell company, was preparing to call in the debt. She had him. But as the day of her interview approached, a new struggle emerged: the emotional cost of the confrontation. She had spent a decade hating him, but seeing him crumble from afar felt different than being the one to push him off the ledge. She remembered the way he used to tuck her hair behind her ear. She remembered the way they used to share a single burger because it was all they could afford. Could she really do it? Could she destroy the man who was once her entire world? Or was she just becoming exactly like him? Cold, calculating, and willing to sacrifice people for power. We've reached a pivotal moment in Evelyn's journey. She has the power to destroy Julian, but to do it, she has to lose the last piece of the girl who once loved him. Do you think Evelyn should have taken her evidence to the authorities and walked away with her soul intact? Or was this personal confrontation the only way she could ever truly be free of him? Share your perspective below. The morning of the meeting, the Valerius Tower felt like a tomb. Julian had spent the night in his office. His eyes were bloodshot. His tie was loose. He had just received word that the Phoenix Group was refusing to extend his deadline. He needed a miracle. He needed someone he could trust. Someone who wouldn't judge him. When Eva Black was announced, he didn't even look up. "Come in," he rasped. "Just put the coffee on the desk. I don't have time for the pleasantries today." Evelyn walked in. The air in the room seemed to vanish. She didn't go for the coffee. She walked straight to the window, looking out at the city they had once dreamed of conquering together. She saw the reflection of the man behind her, a billionaire who had everything and nothing. "Julian," she said. Just his name. No title. "No, sir." He froze. That voice. It wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was a voice that belonged to a different life. A life where he was happy. A life he had traded for a title. He slowly turned his chair. His heart hammered against his ribs, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He looked at her. He saw the expensive silk, the diamond-sharp posture, and the eyes that held a decade of unspoken pain. "Evelyn," he whispered. The word sounded like a prayer and a death sentence all at once. "You look tired, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of the Eva persona. "Is the view from the top not what you expected?" "What are you doing here?" he stammered, his mind racing to connect the dots. "How did you get past security? How did you get this job?" "I didn't get the job, Julian," she said, stepping closer until she was just inches from the desk he had used as a shield for 10 years. "I bought the debt that pays for the chair you're sitting in." In that moment, Julian Valerius finally understood. He hadn't been fighting a faceless corporation. He had been fighting the ghost of the woman he betrayed. He reached out, his fingers trembling as if to touch her sleeve, to see if she was real. But Evelyn stepped back. "Don't," she said. The silence that followed was deafening. 10 years of secrets, 10 years of ambition, and 10 years of heartache were all compressed into the few feet of space between them. Julian realized he didn't just lose his company. He realized he had lost the only person who ever truly knew him. And as he looked at her, he saw something that broke his heart more than any financial ruin could. He saw that she didn't love him anymore. She didn't even hate him. She just saw him for exactly what he was. Small. We're at the midpoint of this incredible story, and the real fallout is only just beginning. If you're still here, I genuinely appreciate you. This has been a journey of passion, betrayal, and the high cost of $1 billion ego. What's kept you engaged so far? Is it the desire to see Julian's total downfall, or are you hoping for a moment of redemption? Let me know in the comments. The shift didn't just happen in that room. It had been happening for years, invisible to everyone but the woman who orchestrated it. While Julian Valerius was busy being a billionaire, Evelyn Thorne was becoming a sovereign. The turning point, the moment the momentum truly shifted, wasn't when she walked into his office. It was 6 months earlier, in a high-security vault in London. Evelyn had finally secured the signatures of the 3 major creditors Julian had betrayed. These were men Julian thought he had outmaneuvered, men he had laughed at in press releases. When Evelyn showed them the forensic audit of Julian's creative accounting, they didn't just give her their debt, they gave her their loyalty. Evelyn had transformed. She was no longer the girl who waited for a phone call. She was the woman who made the world wait. She had mastered the complex language of derivatives, hostile takeovers, and corporate law. But more importantly, she had mastered herself. While Julian had spent a decade building a reputation of excellence based on a lie, Evelyn had built a reputation of integrity in the shadows. She wasn't just wealthy now, she was stable. She had achieved financial independence long before she decided to come for Julian's throne. She had expanded her own operations, quietly acquiring smaller tech firms that Julian had bullied, turning them into a network of allies that functioned like a silent army. But Julian's path was the opposite. For him, the transformation was a slow, agonizing descent into the reality of his own making. In the weeks leading up to the final confrontation, Julian had begun to realize he was being hunted. He just didn't know by whom. He felt the net tightening. He lost his grip on his board. His friends at the country club stopped returning his calls. This was his redemption arc. Not a glorious rise, but a brutal stripping away of his ego. He had to confront the fact that he had no one. His ex-wife hated him. His parents were gone. The loyal staff he paid millions to were already sending their resumes to his competitors. He started making humble, desperate attempts to save the company, working 20-hour shifts, trying to fix the bugs in the code himself. He was learning, too late, the value of the hard work he used to share with Evelyn in that queen's kitchen. But there was one factor Julian never knew about. A secret that would make his eventual defeat feel like a mercy killing. 10 years ago, when Julian walked out of that restaurant, he didn't just leave Evelyn. He left a part of his own legacy he didn't even know existed. Evelyn had raised their son, Leo, in total secrecy. She didn't use him as a pawn. She didn't raise him to hate his father. She raised him to be everything Julian wasn't: honest. Leo was a prodigy. By age 9, he was solving equations that baffled university students. But his true strength was his character. He saw his mother's struggle. He saw the nights she spent studying until her eyes bled. He was her reason for the transformation. Evelyn wasn't just taking over a company for revenge. She was reclaiming an inheritance for a son Julian had deemed a distraction before he even knew he existed. The escalation of her success was now unstoppable. The network effects of her good reputation meant that when the Phoenix Group, Evelyn, finally called in Julian's debt, the rest of the market didn't panic. They cheered. They wanted her in charge. They wanted the adult back in the room. As she stood in Julian's office now, the transformation was complete. Julian was a man drowning in the past. Evelyn was the future. Julian looked at her, his voice a broken whisper. "I could have helped you. We could have been a power couple. Why did you wait so long?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "I didn't wait, Julian. I grew. While you were busy pretending to be a king, I was busy making sure your crown was made of glass." The preparation for the climax was over. The antagonist, the version of Julian that thought he was untouchable, was dead. All that was left was the man. Evelyn was at a new level of peace. She didn't feel the burning rage anymore. She felt a profound, quiet clarity. She had won, but the victory wasn't the building. The victory was the fact that she could look in the mirror and know she hadn't become him to beat him. She was ready to deliver the final sentence. The one that wouldn't just break his heart, but would redefine his entire existence. At this point, Evelyn has transformed into someone completely different. From a betrayed waitress to a global titan. Julian, too, has been stripped down to his core. Do you think people can truly change their fundamental nature after a decade of greed? Or is Julian's redemption just a reaction to losing his money? This is important for what comes next in the final act. Share your thoughts below. The air in the room didn't just feel thin. It felt heavy with the weight of 10 years of unspoken truths. Julian Valerius sat behind the desk he once considered a throne, but today it looked more like a barricade. He had spent the morning preparing a speech, a final desperate plea for a loan extension. He expected a group of faceless bankers from the Phoenix Group. He expected a cold corporate execution. He didn't expect the woman who had once been his only light to be the one holding the sword. Evelyn's mindset was a fortress of calm. She had spent 3,650 days simulating this exact conversation. She knew Julian's debt down to the last cent, $212,450,000. She knew his legal vulnerabilities. But more importantly, she knew the dramatic irony of the situation. Julian thought she was here for revenge. He thought this was about the $50,000 check. He had no idea that he wasn't just losing his company. He was meeting the person who had protected his legacy while he was busy destroying it. Outside the glass doors, the senior board members, the very men who had laughed at Evelyn 10 years ago, waited in stunned silence. They could see through the glass, but they couldn't hear. They were witnesses to a power shift that would be studied in business schools for decades. "Evelyn," Julian rasped, his voice cracking like dry parchment. You did all this? The Phoenix Group. The hostile takeover. It was you." "I didn't do this to you, Julian," she said, her voice a smooth, lethal silk. "I simply stood back and watched you do it to yourself. I just bought the pieces as they fell." Pause. "Is this the part where you laugh?" Julian asked, a bitter smile touching his lips. "The part where you tell me how much you hated me while you built this empire?" "I didn't build an empire out of hate, Julian. Hate is an exhausting fuel. I built this out of necessity. I had someone to protect." Julian scoffed, his old arrogance flickering for a second. "Protect? You stayed single. I followed your life, Evelyn. I knew you were in Zurich. I thought you were just hiding." "I wasn't hiding. I was raising your son." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a billion-dollar heart finally shattering. The revelation hit Julian harder than the foreclosure ever could. He stared at the screen, at the boy who shared his DNA, the boy who was already more successful in character than Julian had ever been in business. "His name is Leo," Evelyn said softly. "He's a prodigy. He's already been scouted by MIT. And he thinks his father was a brave man who died a long time ago. I never told him the truth, because the truth would have made him small. I wanted him to be big." Julian collapsed back into his chair. The evidence of Evelyn's success was everywhere. In the documents that proved she now owned 51% of his life, and in the image of the son he would never truly know. The fallout was instantaneous. As the documents were signed, Julian wasn't dragged out in handcuffs. Evelyn wouldn't allow that. She maintained her dignity, and in doing so, she forced him to confront his own lack of it. "You can keep the house in the Hamptons," she told him, not out of love but out of a cold, final mercy. "The liquidation of your personal assets will cover the remaining interest. You won't be a billionaire, Julian. But you won't be in debt. You'll be exactly where we started. You'll be nothing." The support from the witnesses was immediate. As Evelyn walked out of the office, the board members didn't look at Julian. They opened the doors for her. They followed her toward the elevators, already pitching their loyalty to the new queen of Valerius Global. The emotional payoff wasn't what she expected. She thought she would feel a rush of adrenaline. Instead, she felt a profound sense of closure. She realized that the one sentence that broke the billionaire's heart, "I'm not here for the job," wasn't just about the company. It was the moment she stopped being an applicant in his life. She realized that revenge wasn't necessary because her success was the ultimate justice. She had survived him. She had thrived without him. She walked out into the cool evening air, where a car was waiting. In the back seat sat Leo, looking up from his book with a bright, innocent smile. "Did you finish your meeting, Mom?" he asked. Evelyn looked back at the towering skyscraper one last time. It was just a building. It was just glass and steel. "Yes, Leo," she said, her voice full of a peace she hadn't felt in 10 years. "The meeting is over. Let's go home. The confrontation is over. Julian has lost his empire, but he gained the crushing knowledge of the family he threw away. Evelyn has her justice, but she chose mercy over total destruction. Do you feel satisfied with how this played out? Or would you have wanted Evelyn to be more ruthless? Would you have told Julian the truth about his son sooner? There's no wrong answer here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The fall of an empire is rarely a loud explosion. More often, it is a long, hollow echo. For Julian Valerius, the immediate consequences were a masterclass in social erasure. Within 48 hours of Evelyn taking the helm, the Valerius name was scrubbed from the lobby of the tower. His private accounts were frozen pending the final audit. The friends who had toasted his genius just a week prior suddenly found themselves unable to remember his phone number. He didn't go to jail. Evelyn's forensic team found he had danced just on the edge of legality. But he was sentenced to the one thing he feared more than prison: irrelevance. He moved into a small apartment in a quiet part of New Jersey, far from the skyscrapers and the flashbulbs. He was a man with a legacy of ash, spending his days watching the stock market ticker of a company he no longer controlled, seeing it thrive under the hand of the woman he had discarded. While Julian faded, Evelyn's rise became a case study in ethical leadership. She didn't just save the company, she transformed its DNA. She replaced Julian's profit-at-all-costs model with a structure focused on long-term sustainability and employee equity. She received the Visionary of the Year award, but she didn't show up to the gala to gloat. She spent that evening at Leo's school, watching him receive an award for a community coding project he had built to help local small businesses. Every win was a full-circle moment of vindication. She wasn't just successful, she was respected. She had built a world where her son could be proud of her name, and his own. Reflecting on the journey, Evelyn realized a truth that would have shocked her younger self. Julian's cruelty had been a dark, twisted gift. If he had stayed, if he had been kind enough to keep her in his shadow, she would have lived a small life. She would have been the wife of a billionaire, never knowing she was meant to be the billionaire herself. The struggle had forced her to develop muscles she didn't know she had. The heartbreak had sharpened her mind. She felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for the pain, but for the person she became because of it. She understood now that some people are meant to be the fire that forges you, not the home where you stay. And what of Leo? As he grew, he began to understand the weight of the journey his mother had taken. He never asked about the man in the skyscraper. To him, Julian wasn't a villain. He was a ghost story, a warning of what happens when a man loves paper more than people. Leo's character was the true victory. He possessed Julian's brilliance but tempered it with Evelyn's empathy. He saw the world not as something to be conquered, but as something to be repaired. His wisdom was beyond his years because he had been raised by a woman who had seen the bottom and the top, and chose to live in the light. Where are they now? Julian Valerius is a name mentioned in footnotes of business textbooks, a cautionary tale of ego. He lives a quiet, diminished life, haunted by the what-ifs that no amount of money could ever answer. Evelyn Thorne is a titan, not just of industry, but of life. Her business continues to set records, but her greatest asset is the peace she feels when she closes her eyes at night. And the future? The future belongs to Leo, a boy who was born from a heartbreak and raised into a legend. The story that began in a rain-soaked alley in Queens didn't end with a bank balance. It ended with a life well built. It ended with the realization that the greatest revenge is not seeing your enemy suffer. It is living a life so magnificent that they become a memory you no longer need to hold on to. Looking at where everyone ended up, Julian in his silence and Evelyn in her strength. Do you believe in karma? Or do you think this was just the natural consequence of the choices they made 10 years ago? I want to hear your final thoughts on this journey in the comments below. In the end, every empire falls. Every skyscraper eventually shadows a different street. But the legacy we leave behind isn't measured in the height of our buildings or the zeros in our bank accounts. It is measured in the lives we touch and the character we maintain when the world tries to break us. This story wasn't just about a billionaire losing his throne or a woman reclaiming her power. It was a masterclass in the true meaning of worth. Julian Valerius had all the wealth in the world, yet he was bankrupt. Evelyn Thorne had nothing but a broken heart, yet she was the richest person in the room because she held onto her integrity. Real success isn't about the destination. It's about who you become during the climb. Julian climbed by stepping on others, and so, when he reached the top, he found there was no one there to catch him when he slipped. Evelyn's philosophy today is simple. Justice is found in excellence, not in vindictiveness. If you asked her now, she would tell you that the best way to get even with those who doubted you is to live a life so expansive, so filled with purpose, that their betrayal becomes a footnote. She doesn't look back at the Queen's apartment with pain anymore. She looks back at it with gratitude. That cramped, cold room was the forge. It taught her that she was her own greatest asset. "If I could talk to the girl I was 10 years ago," Evelyn once remarked in an interview, "I wouldn't tell her it gets easier. I'd tell her she gets stronger. I'd tell her that the person who walks away from you is actually clearing the path for the person you are meant to become." The greatest legacy of this journey isn't the Valerius Tower, now renamed the Thorne Foundation Center. It is Leo. Hardship didn't break him. It prepared him. He grew up seeing a mother who refused to be a victim, and because of that, he doesn't know how to be a bystander. He represents the breaking of a generational pattern. He has the intelligence to build empires, but the heart to ensure those empires serve people, not just ego. The struggle of the past decade ensured that Leo will never measure his value by a stock price. He knows that his mother's love was the only venture capital he ever truly needed to succeed. As for Julian, Evelyn feels no triumph in his downfall. Bitterness is a poison that only hurts the one carrying it, and she poured that cup out long ago. She understands now that Julian's destiny was determined by his choices, not her actions. He built a cage of gold, and he eventually found himself locked inside it. Her peace comes from a final, quiet realization. His opinion never mattered. She spent years wanting him to see her, to regret leaving her, to realize her value. But the moment she realized her own value, his recognition became unnecessary. She didn't need him to apologize to be free. She freed herself the moment she stopped waiting for him to change. There is a lesson here for all of us. Whether you are in your Queen's apartment phase or standing at the top of your own mountain, remember this. Integrity is the only currency that doesn't devalue. Temporary setbacks are often just setups for a version of success you haven't even imagined yet. Don't measure your worth by the standards of people who don't know the depth of your soul. The power to transform isn't in the money you make. It's in the love you have for yourself when you have nothing left. Evelyn Thorne didn't win because she took Julian's building. She won because she never let him take her spirit. Thank you for staying with us through this 1+ hour journey. Stories like these remind us that no matter how dark the night, the dawn is inevitable for those who keep walking. Looking at where everyone ended up, at the legacy Evelyn built and the lessons Julian learned the hard way, do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of the choices we make? I want to hear your final thoughts. This story has touched thousands of people, and your perspective is the final piece of the puzzle. Drop a comment below. We have traveled a long road today. From the cramped, dimly lit streets of Queens to the glittering cold heights of the Valerius Tower, we witnessed a transformation that was never truly about money. We saw Julian Valerius, a man who thought he could trade his soul for a seat at the table of the elite, only to find himself sitting alone in the dark. And we saw Evelyn Thorne, a woman who was discarded like a liability, but who chose to invest in herself until she became the most powerful force in the room. This journey was marked by betrayal, by the crushing weight of $200 million in debt, and by a decade of silence. But the turning point wasn't the hostile takeover. It wasn't the moment the documents were signed. The real turning point was the day Evelyn decided that Julian's opinion of her no longer defined her worth. She moved from a place of proving them wrong to a place of living it right. What makes this story significant isn't the billionaire lifestyle or the dramatic one-sentence reveal. It matters because it mirrors the struggles so many of us face. We have all felt like the underdog. We have all had moments where someone we trusted made us feel small, or where circumstances seemed designed to keep us down. Evelyn's story offers a universal hope, that resilience is a superpower, and that love, for a child, for a dream, or for oneself, is a more sustainable fuel than revenge ever will be. It reminds us that justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes, justice is simply building a life that is so vibrant and full that the ghosts of your past no longer have a place to stay. As you move forward with your own day, take this lesson with you. Your current circumstances are a chapter, not the whole book. Whether you are facing financial hardship, a broken relationship, or the daunting task of starting over, remember that you are the author of what comes next. Don't let the Julians of your world convince you that you are nothing. Use their rejection as the foundation for your empire. Use their silence to find your own voice. Your worth is not a market price. It is an inherent truth that no one can take unless you give it away. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable about resilience and success, please leave a like and share your biggest takeaway in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights make this community truly special. Your stories of overcoming obstacles are what keep us going. Thanks for joining me on this 3-hour journey. See you on the next one. Remain blessed as you subscribe to the channel and join our growing family of dreamers and doers. Remember, you are not defined by what others think of you. You are defined by how you respond when life tests you. Evelyn proved that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so beautiful that your critics become irrelevant. Until next time, stay strong, stay focused, and never let anyone convince you that you're nothing. You're everything you choose to become.